metadata is the sixth topic. I use the term description and representation information because that comes from the OAIS reference model. But if you loosely think about it as metadata right now, that's safe enough. It is slightly different. The importance of metadata in the digital curation lifecycle is emphasized by the fact that it's sitting in the middle as one of these concentric rings. And it's sitting here, meaning that it is relevant to every single aspect of the life cycle. What does it do? Why do we need it? Well, it describes the digital objects. Very important. And that's not as simple as for a paper document giving some basic information. We need to know quite a lot more about the technical characteristics. How large the file is could be crucial. For example, what software created it, and so on. We need quite a lot of this technical information. We need to describe what we have done to the file, whether we migrated it, and if so, when, and from what file format to what file format, what kind of migration, probably the application we used to do that, and perhaps the operator of that as well, depending on your context. So we need to keep a lot more administrative metadata than we used to in the past. Luckily for us, the process of generating a lot of this metadata can be automated, so it's not quite as difficult as it sounds. We don't need to have a lot of catalogers or classifiers sitting there with the metadata. We need to set up the systems to allow it to be created. So just some examples, we probably need a persistent identifier, something that says this digital object lives here and is always going to lead to that digital object. We need technical information. I've talked a little bit about that. And we need metadata that describes what happened. Just a reminder, of course, I need to encourage you to look at my book, Digital Curation. Now, normally I don't talk about books I write very much, but this one seems to be popular, and a lot of people have used it. I don't like it very much. I know it's problems, it has problems. But one of the things, perhaps, that is useful could be useful to you is some of the tables in it that attempt to summarize. And this is one where we are looking at a particular kind of metadata and what it tries to do. Just as a very quick example from my employer, this is what the user sees in our DSpace repository, not a very sophisticated one. So they see those items about the item, this particular guide for students. But if we look at what lies behind that, some of the metadata, this is using Dublin Core, which is a very basic metadata scheme. We can see a lot more sitting in there. We've got dates. Note that they are expressed in using a particular standard in a standard format, and standards are critical in this field. We have a persistent identifier using a system called the handle system. And the point there is that we can always locate that file, even if that digital file moves somewhere else to another server. This URL will lead to it. And we see here some checksums, and these are important. They're automatically generated by the system, if you tell the system to do so, and they are used as a quick check to see if the file has changed. They should usually be identical. If they are not, you have a problem. So they're a quick way of checking whether a file has changed. Now, I have a very brief section here about selection and appraisal, and the reason for that, just let me go back here. I was flicking forward to see if I had a copy of the life cycle model in front of me, but I haven't. Sorry. But sitting in the life cycle model, we have appraise and select. They put a lot of emphasis on appraisal and selection. I'm not going to talk about this very much at all because you have a session tomorrow from Leslie Richmond about this very point. But appraisal is critical. Even more so, I suggest, than it is with analog or non-digital archival material. And that's to do with the sheer quantity we already have and are going to see a lot more of. So the life cycle model builds in reappraisal as an important concept and something that should be carried out. There are a list of questions we can think about. Again, these are on the PowerPoint that's been provided, and I won't dwell on them. What we are seeing, though, is some, in the recent years, the last 2 or 3 years, are many publications that are aimed at small archives or medium-sized archives, maybe 1 or 2 people involved in this process, that tell us how to take some of these steps. So this particular one, that's the title page of a publication published last year about managing born digital content received on physical media, and it's very useful. We're starting to see a lot more of these come out, so take a look at what is published and what is available. It's important. Here's another example. It's about research data, but nonetheless it is, again, useful to other contexts. And there is a checklist that the Digital Curation Centre has put out. Now, I think, finally, yes, ingest. So you have all the stuff in digital form, digital stuff. There's that old joke, stuff is a technical term. But anything that's digital, we have it. It may be sitting on servers, it may be on shared drives, it may be on physical media like CDs or floppy disks or tapes or whatever, we have it. How do we get it into our archive? Or rather, what do we have to do to it before we put it into our archive? And so there's a section here, ingest, that is a very important part of the DCC lifecycle model. And ingest is something that actually we know a lot about. There are many, many lists. I've produced just one here about the things that we have to do, the actions we have to take on our files. We have to apply to our digital objects, I suppose, before we can put them into our digital archive. And if I just touch upon a couple of those to give you the flavour, we have to verify file formats to make sure the file is what it claims to be. Now, we can do this automatically for most file formats. It's not something you have to sit down and individually do. It'd go crazy and take a lot of time and never sleep, I think, if you try to do that manually. There are tools. I've indicated 2 of them. Jove, there is now up to a second version, Jove 2, and Pronom, which comes from the National Archives in the UK. So these are tools that help us, and in fact there are software tools for a lot of these steps right now. Very little of this is carried out manually anymore. Some metadata, for example, can be automatically assigned for certain types of file formats. So it's not something we have to sit down and do. We can automatically assign some of these. There is a companion website to that book I wrote on digital curation, and here, oops, let me go back one. Let me go forward again. Here is the URL for it, and it has probably another 10 lists like this of what we need to carry out during the ingest process. If you look closely at them, a lot of them are about making sure the file is in good shape and about applying metadata of different kinds. So metadata becomes extremely important. So finally, just to round this up, because I need coffee probably as much as you do, I just want to emphasize that for each of the steps in the life cycle model, we know, the early steps, we know a lot about how to carry out these processes. And one thing in this field is you must never reinvent the wheel yourself. There's so much good material out there. Don't sit down and start from scratch. So just to summarize some of what I've been talking about, to plan is extremely important, and some of the areas in which we need to plan are listed there. I've put only one mention of policy, file naming policies, but in fact there are many other policies that should be developed as well. We need to identify what we actually have. That can be a challenge in a large collection. We need to select or appraise, and again that is something that typically we are not doing with digital objects in archives. We're not doing enough of it, and it's leading us already into problems of handling very large quantities. But you're the people who have the challenges, the legal issues. I'm not that person, so it's easy for me to say. And ingest, there's a whole range of actions, activities that we need to carry out, some of which, most of which actually are pretty automatic now. And then leading on to the session in 2 days' time, I want to talk about the rest of the life cycle model, but in particular about storage and the importance of ensuring reliable, trusted storage. If we don't have that, we can't run a good digital archive, and of managing the process in general. There are many places you can go for more information. This is a field where the web, unlike other fields maybe, is full of extremely accurate, good information. There's very little in this field I've come across that's actually not good information. In particular, I would encourage you to look at two areas. The European Union funded research projects generate a lot of good material. I put up here Cassa, the first one, which is now finished, and maybe is less useful immediately for you. The Digital Curation Centre, which has been around for 10 years now, 9 years maybe, and has a wealth of really good information, ranging from the start, how to do it, right through to the much more complex technical information that's useful. Planets, which again has finished but has turned into another project called the Planets Open Foundation, I think. they're producing some really interesting stuff, and I think in maybe 1 year's time that's going to be crucial to how we manage our digital archives. Digital Preservation Europe again has finished, and I like to keep it up there because one of its aims was to make sure that high quality material was made available to people like us, so I encourage you to look at that. And then because I live and work in the US, I have to mention some of the US material. The main one is the Library of Congress's website, which has the curious name of NBIP. But if you search Library of Congress digital preservation, you will come to their very helpful website. Don't be put off by the word library in that. The material there is equally of use to your context. So that's it. Thank you.
I have a question.
Certainly.
You told that reappraisal processes are desirable for digital preservation, but when you inherit discs and material stuff, as you told, and you have no more contacts with the records creators, how can you proceed in reappraising materials?
That's an interesting and difficult question, I think. I'm going to sidestep it, not answer it, but indicate where some of the situations where reappraisal can be applied. It can be automatically applied on purely technical grounds. So the fact that we no longer wish to engage with a particular digital file format may be sufficient reason not to continue to keep some materials. Might be. But you have to make that decision, of course, in your context. Another case is where your organization has moved away from one field. Let's say it was a university archive. It has moved out of teaching in one area completely and no longer wishes to keep that material, or has decided that that teaching goes to another university, so the material will be moved, disposed of to another archive. So I think reappraisal obviously has to be defined in terms of your own collection and organisation.
I would like us to add one thing about in the archival sector, among the project, there is a very nice project called Archivimatica, where you can find open source available for you for doing the ingestion. And it's really very well done, according to a very good way to interpret OIS and metadata, and how to create them. You can do yourself. So it is very easy and not expensive. It's for free. So it is a way to start, just to understand, for instance, because it follows very carefully. I have some Italian materials also I can send to the Italian people, but you can find all the English version on Archivimatica, and a very good explanation done by the Peter Gardner, the man who speaks English so fast. The English people have to do the subtitles to his presentation on YouTube.
And I would just like to emphasize that Archivimatica is actually very important, and I will be mentioning it briefly on Thursday. So I agree entirely with that.
Other questions, please?
I have a question about the number who identify a digital object. If it could be considered as a name of a file with many numbers which can identify the owner, the archive that preserve, and the different levels of classification, and then the number of these single files, or if you imagine a unique number.
The answer is that both in practice can occur, and I have seen both. I've seen, for example, some state records in the US which have everything in the file name. They're very simple records. They are marriage records, so it's very easy in the file names of those to put all of the data, the jurisdiction, the date, the names of each party, can all go nicely and neatly into a file name, into a unique identifier, and there's no need to do anything else. And if they are not unique, then you simply then add a numerical qualifier. There is no practical limit that I'm aware of in computers currently to the length of file names, so potentially it's possible to put everything in. But it becomes extremely unwieldy, and so I think you would probably wish to develop a scheme that works for your particular sets of materials.
Have you had experiences in training people in file naming? Is it a difficult task to train employees or staffs to use methods?
I have personally not been in that situation. What I encourage my students to look at, though, are some of the publicly available file naming conventions that are available on the web. So if you, again, search for some of those on the World Wide Web, you will quite quickly come across some of them, and then you might want to maybe adapt one of those for your own purposes.
There is an interesting standard developed by under Delos project. Delos was a project on digital library, and there was some a standard developed at that time in 2007, I think, where they made some statement of how to name the files, also from the grammatical point, grammar point of view. That is, not to leave space, not to use underscore, no, not to use, because all these elements get the possibility to find. So you don't have to use space, but the capital letter to link one term to another, and some other things very useful. But of course, the semantic issue is the more complex, because it depends on the environment and the organization.
My question was about involving people, motivating people to use, to be precise, to... This is an issue.
A never-ending problem, I think.
I have a question regarding, well, a little bit the opposite of what we've been talking, which is the need to eliminate electronic documents that were preserved for a long time. If you have legal requirements that make you actually have to eliminate documents that were kept for 10 years, and for 10 years you probably want to use some long-term preservation and storage. Is it because I have the problem with my IT department, they always tell me that if you want to believe that it is deleted, it's deleted. But if you want me to retrieve it, I can retrieve it for you. If I can't, I'll find a more specialized guy in IT that can go to that disk and find it for you. So is it really possible to completely eliminate documentation?
Oh, absolutely, and definitely, and there are standards for this. Surprisingly, perhaps the US Department of Defense has standards for this. But if you look at the life cycle model, you can see that dispose is built in there as an outcome of appraise and select. You may appraise and decide not to keep the materials, for example. And if you look at the details of what it says there in appraise, in dispose, one option is to dispose of the materials to another archive. That's valid, but another is to destroy. Yeah. And records managers are used to destruction. The term destruction, I think. Librarians, who I teach as well, find this a real problem. They don't want to destroy. Now, as I said, there are standards which work at various levels. I think the latest version I'm aware of, which is now a few years old, has 36 different overwrites of the storage media. 36, which takes a very long time. Another way is to take an axe and put it through the media. That one works very well too.
Okay, thank you.
Wie stoppe ich die Aufnahme?
Ja.